Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending our conference today. Both those of you who are in the room and those of you who are online, thank you for joining us. It's hugely appreciated. The really good news is we didn't have a train strike this year. For those of you who have been involved in the centre for a while or know of us, we organised our conference this time last year and had to put it all online for a train strike. So I've been avidly checking the train strike websites to say, you know, please, train strike gods, don't have a train strike today. How lovely it would be for us to all be able to be together. So thank you for taking the time. And I know some of you have come quite some distance to be with us today. It's enormously appreciated. Thank you very much. I'm Andy Limer. I am the director of the centre. And on behalf of the Centre for Personal Financial Wellbeing here at Aston University and our joint event hosts, the Money and Pension Service, we welcome you to our second annual Personal Financial Wellbeing Conference. This is going to be a very interactive event, we hope. Excuse me. One of the things that annoys me when I go to conferences is I sit in the audience often and think I can only remember about 5% of what I hear, because we're often flooded with such interesting, relevant, timely information. You just can't obtain it all. So what we decided to do with the conference this year is try to reduce the volume of different things that we do to allow us to have more time to focus on the things we have chosen to look at. So you'll notice on our agenda that actually we have quite long single sessions. And the idea, hopefully, is that we will have a panel who will be able to introduce the topic, but we'll be able to be very interactive in what we do. So I hope, given all the expertise we have in the audience, not just the expertise we have on our panels, that we'll be able to have a really engaging and full conversation today. And I hope you'll feel you'll be able to give as well as take from this event, and we'll go home having not only learned some things, but hopefully been able to talk about the things that you feel passionate about the research that you are doing, about the skills and talents and expertise that you're bringing, both here in the room and online, because I hope that will be a really important part of the event. And I hope you'll go home thinking, great, we actually had time to really get into the meat of the subjects that we've chosen to talk about. We can't talk about everything, but hopefully the ones we have chosen are going to be things that we can go into some depth. The centre, is somebody moving on the slides? Thanks, Arseni, thank you. Oh, right, yes, that's a step too far. Yeah, I've got two things. I haven't got enough hands to be able to manage a clicker as well, or, you know, that may be a step too far. I hope most of you know a little bit about the centre. The centre here was set up just over 12 months ago to look at all things to do with personal finance. Anything to do with where individuals and households are looking at the finance decisions that they need to make. I don't need to tell you as an educated audience that this is, sadly, not a small topic area in the current climate. We have enormous challenges in the UK and worldwide for the centre to be able to look at. And over the last year, we've been engaged in an enormous range of things, actually, as a centre. And I hope you'll have opportunity, if you haven't done so already, to go and have a look at our website and to have a look at some of the sorts of things we do. And believe me, there's some really exciting projects that we're about to launch, including some with some of you in the room here that we're really looking forward to doing. So do have a look at the website that we're engaging in. We've got 3 panels that we're going to run through today that actually, as I was thinking about what I was going to say at the beginning, sort of naturally fit the 3 areas that we're trying to focus on as a centre. We're looking at trying to address and look at how do people make everyday decisions about money. And one of our panels, the last one of the 3, is going to be focused at a project that we're really proud to be involved with called the Real Accounts Project, that I hope most of you will have heard of. Certainly you'll be very excited about by the end of today if you haven't, because it's a really innovative project with our partners in Nest and Glasgow Caledonian University that are doing financial diaries projects with just under 50 families right across the country, looking at how they are coping in precarious income situations. So I hope you're looking forward to that. We also, as a centre, try and address areas of financial resilience. How can people develop financial resilience, the ability to cope with economic shocks that might happen to them? And our second panel today is going to be looking at what's going on our first panel today is going to be looking at research work that's being done here and in other places around young adults. People are in that important transition stage from being young people who are often looking to their parents or their guardians for support around finance, to having that first job, to being newly independent, to going to university, or starting their first employment, and therefore beginning to have to make their own decisions. And we all know that's a really critical point for people thinking about establishing patterns and principles for finance. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and that fits quite naturally into our second session. Morning. Do come in. Our third core area of focus as a research centre is around sort of stepping back a little from the detail and thinking about what are the sort of underlying principles, what are the patterns, what are the trends that are emerging in personal finance that as academics we can highlight and draw upon and help people understand better. It's one of the key things, of course, that academics bring to the table, is that ability to be able to theorise, to think about principle. And one of our panels today, our second panel, it particularly leans into that part of what we do as a centre, because our second panel today will be talking about the work that we do in part and others are doing around what's going on in councils, in district councils, in city councils, thinking about new ways of alleviating poverty. We know that poverty hasn't gone away. Yeah, it's getting worse. And the old ways of doing things clearly are not solving the problem. So what we want to do is to show some examples of some of the great work that a couple of the partners that we're working with are doing to try and think differently about what can be done at that level to make a difference to poverty alleviation. So that's the sort of exciting day that we've tried to lay out for you, which I hope you're going to enjoy. Please do feel free to post liberally on social media about the things you hear today. Do take photos, share it. We know that not everybody could come along, and so it would be great to be able to give people at least a bit of an insight as the sorts of things we do. Please feel free to do that. There is details up on the starter slides that will show you the Twitter feeds and so on. Yes, there at the bottom. Thanks very much, Arseni. That will show you some handles that you could use if you want to include those, so that we can pick that stuff up and retweet it. That would be that would be marvellous if you wouldn't mind. We are also recording the event today. You should have been asked before you came, or you were asked before you came, if you don't want to be captured on photos, to let us know. So hopefully we know who the people in the audience who are in that position. If you haven't told us that, and that does matter to you, please do let one of the organising team know as soon as possible, so we can do our best not to capture you on videos. There will be somebody wandering around with a camera in coffee time to capture B-roll, as well as capturing what we're doing here in the event. And the plan is to try and to also capture what we do, both the panel comment and the discussion afterwards, and make that available to people online for them to be able to watch afterwards. So obviously bear that in mind as you frame your questions. There are cameras that will be pointing at you, those two cameras there, so that we can get a real feel, I hope, for you participating rather than just pointing at the panellists and be disembodied voices. So just be aware of that. So I think I have probably said all the things that I wanted to say. Yeah, for those of you online, it's marvellous if you could keep your cameras on. Thank you. The couple of you have got your cameras on already. We appreciate that might not be possible all the time, but it's really, as you can probably see from the camera in the room, we can actually see you on a big wall here at the front, and you're there on the back wall as well. So by having your cameras on, hopefully you can really feel like you're a part of the event, and we can see you and engage with you too. So if you are able to keep your cameras on for at least part of the time, that would be marvellous. Thank you, Olga, Bobby, for just switching on your cameras. Hi there, Kim. Yeah, Liam, Natalie, nice to see you. Yeah, thank you very much all for having your cameras on as much as you can. That would be fantastic, and then hopefully we can make you really feel like you're part of the room. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first panel. Thank you very much.
Great. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome you to our first panel this morning, which is about young adults and financial wellbeing. Our interest as a centre in this topic really grew from our conference last year that Andy mentioned, because there we had lots of sessions that discussed various aspects of adults' financial well-being, and we touched on children as well. But we didn't really touch on this kind of transitional phase of life that is young adulthood. My own work around pension saving has shown that there are very distinctive patterns around financial behaviours in this period of life. So I'm really excited to hear from our panellists today, who each bring a very different perspective on young adulthood and understanding financial well-being in young adulthood. I'm going to keep the introductions brief so they can say a bit more about themselves, but welcome to the panel Helen Pitman from Money and Pension Service, Carla Hoppe from Wealthbrite, and Pauline Prevett from the University of Manchester. The format for this session is that each panellist will have a short presentation to tell you a bit more about their work and their perspective in young adults and financial well-being, after which we'll move to the discussion, and there's plenty of time for questions. So we'll invite our audience members, both in the room and online, to ask questions live by raising your physical or virtual hand, and I will come to you to ask your question. So I think we can move to our first presentation, which is from Helen.
Good morning. It's lovely to see so many of you, both in the room and online. Lots of smiling faces. Hopefully you'll still be smiling at the end of this. So it's lovely to actually be here. I'm Senior Insights Manager at the Money and Pension Service. One of the reasons I'm here to talk to you today is because I lead on all of our large-scale nationally representative surveys. So at MAPS, we know a lot about young adults from all of that work that we do. We survey the UK population, and we talk to them a lot about financial well-being. So what I'm here to do is give you that snapshot. So that's my first task, is to talk to you about what young adults do. And I'd like to say, when I talk about young adults, I'm focusing on that 18 to 24 age group. So I know that might be slightly different to what some of you talk about. Some of you may go slightly older than that. Others of you might start that slightly younger. But that's what I'm talking about today when I do that. So yeah, that snapshot of where we are with their financial well-being. And then I want to share some other work that we've done over several years, profiling young adult population, thinking about how they behave, what their attitudes are, and also a little bit about their perspectives. And then finally, I'm going to look at some things that might work if we're talking about trying to help engage young people with their money and their finances. So this first slide has some key facts about what we know about young adults from our two flagship surveys that we run at the Money and Pension Service. Firstly, our Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey, where every 3 years we speak to about 1,000 young adults, and we last did that in 2021. And also from our Debt Need Survey, where we spoke to about 2,000 young adults in 2022. And I want to pull out a couple of key stats here. So what I've done on this slide is compare the young adult population in the darker blue with the working age population. So the working age population is everybody in the survey aged 18 to 65, and that's the smaller, brighter blue number on the slides. So using our quite specific measure of young adults who need debt advice, 39% of young adults need and would benefit from debt advice and meet that criteria. Linked to that, 30% are using credit to buy everyday essentials and pay for bills, and because they've run out of money. And nearly 70% of them are struggling or indeed already behind on bills and payments. And all of this is often underpinned by a lack of confidence. I have to say that most of the numbers on this slide paint quite a sad, downbeat picture of young adults' financial well-being. And when we looked at the results from the Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey in 2018 and compared the data with young adults in 2021, we found that over that period, the situation for many of them had worsened. That period of the early pandemic really did impact this young adult cohort. And we can imagine that many of these numbers on this slide will be worse again now when we're looking at the cost of living pressures that a lot of people are facing. And I actually learnt another stat around young adults from a different source at a webinar that we held last week on vulnerable children and young people. So in that 18 to 24 age group, they're the highest growing sector when it comes to taking out loan shark loans. And quite often they're being targeted on social media to take out those loan shark loans. So that's making the situation more difficult indeed for them still. There are a couple of brighter stats, so it's not a completely negative picture. There's a smaller proportion of young adults here that aren't saving when compared to the overall working age population, so that's encouraging. And they're also equally as likely as the working age population to be saving regularly. And also perhaps we're seeing some of the impacts of auto-enrolment. So there was a 10 percentage point drop in young adults who didn't have a plan for their finances in retirement compared to 2018. So it moved from 70% in 2018 to 60% in 2021. We have a whole host of stats, and I could go on and present loads and loads more stats on young adults and their financial well-being. But if you do want to know any more of those, do come and talk to one of us at the MAPS team and we can help you with those. But I'm going to move on. So we did some work in 2015 with Tina Harrison and the team at Edinburgh University, and we looked at the young adult population and tried to segment them to give us a picture of what their behaviours and attitudes were like. I think the numbers in this group may have changed, so we may find the proportions switching a little bit, but the profiles themselves probably still hold true. This was our data from our 2015 Young Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey and found 3 distinct groups of young adults. You can see them here. They're the dreamers, the drifters, and the planners. And I think probably if we look at those, we've probably all met dreamers, drifters, and planners, and probably most of us, possibly some point further back in our history for others of us than others, have been young adults and have maybe been dreamers, drifters, or planners ourselves. The dreamers had financial goals for their future, but they didn't have plans to achieve them. They were less confident in managing their money and making financial decisions. They were more confident than the drifters, and in terms of attitude, they were most likely to feel anxious about their finances. They were also quite likely to perceive that they saved less on average than the other groups. The drifters were the least likely of all the 3 groups to have plans or goals. They were least confident and most likely to be financially dependent on their parents. And in terms of their attitudes, they were least likely to be saving for a rainy day. Planners were the only group that had any financial goals that then actually followed them through and supported them with plans to achieve those goals. They were the most confident in managing their money and making financial decisions, and the least likely to be financially dependent on their parents. In terms of their attitudes, they were most likely to be saving for the longer term and see it as important, and also to save for the rainy day. They were most likely to perceive that they saved more than others in their age group on average. Now, I know that some of you will also have different ways of looking at that young adult population, and they'll be equally valid, but those for us was just a really interesting lens and a reminder for us all that attitudinally, behaviourally, and situationally, these young adults aren't just one group of people who are all the same. They're all going through different experiences as they potentially move in and out of education, work, and employment. On this next slide, I'm just going to not say very much at all and leave you to have a quick read of some of those quotes there from that research that we carried out. It just reflects on the differences between those young adults and their opinions and just highlights those differences and contrasts. So the second part of the presentation, I just want to very quickly touch on a few different evidence pieces of work that we've done that might help us to know a little bit more about what might work to help improve the situation for young adults. So first of all, thinking about the channel. In 2021, we published a rapid literature review that was conducted by 2 experts in this children and young people's area. And it particularly looked at young people and focused on their use of information and online seeking for advice and guidance around money. It showed us, as we expected, that young people use a wide variety of sources to try and find out about their money and search for help. Offline was still an important channel. So indeed, our own evidence from our Children and Young People survey shows that friends and family, particularly parents, are often the first people that young people turn to when they need help with their money. They also look to trusted advisors and professionals, such as youth workers, and those people are vital to them at points of transition in particular, and also where they're already meeting those young professionals to help them with other issues. They become a trusted messenger, and that trust is really critical when it comes to factors around money. Online was not surprisingly also a key tool for young adults. This was brought out in all of the literature. So social media, YouTube, blogs, and online influencers were all highlighted as really important in the review. It also said, interestingly, that it was really difficult to predict what platforms would be popular. It's a really fast-moving landscape, and I think we've all seen since then the explosion of TikTok, and in particular the sort of related FinTok trends, where I'm sure that a lot of young adults these days are going to get their financial fix and possibly taking guidance off of FinTok influencers. The literature says that young people find the internet a really vital source of advice, which is appealing to them because it's informal, it's free, it's available 24/7, it's there when they need it, and importantly, it's confidential and anonymous. They could easily access first-hand experiences from other young people and peers, and importantly, they would have control over their own guidance journey and where it was going and where they went next. So this was really good for them, especially when it came to a particularly sensitive subject like money. But the review also highlighted some drawbacks to the online channel. So the evidence suggests that young people often just started with a very generic search using a couple of keywords on an internet search engine, and then were quickly overwhelmed by the amount and mass of information that they got back. They didn't have the tools necessarily to help them make sense of the information that they got served up. They didn't know how to work out if that information was reliable or trustworthy, whether that was advertising or driven by a commercial motive. And even if they got that far, sorting through all of that information, they then didn't necessarily have the tools or experience to apply or know what to do with the information that they'd found. So that's something for us to think about when we're looking at that channel, is making sure it's really clear. So then, if the channel is important, the message itself is also really important. So this work was done for the Money Advice Service in 2018 and was done by Britain Thinks, and it looked at what potential solutions for helping young adults improve their financial well-being could look like. And this work developed these 5 key principles that are behind me for communicating what we called rules of thumb, or indeed money tips, to young adults. And this is a really handy set of principles that I think apply really nicely to not just these money tips, but also potentially to interventions. And they fit nicely with the BIT East model of behaviour change around being easy, attractive, social and timely. So the research showed that most of the young adults that we spoke to would welcome tips and guidance to help them manage their money better, and that they wish they'd been taught more about managing money when they were younger. So the tips on the screen, so they really wanted something they could start working on immediately, so take immediate action and having a clear target, and that really helped some of them focus in their attention on the goal that they were trying to achieve. Also explaining how to do, I've moved on before I should have done. Also, they wanted someone to explain exactly what they should do, as well as that overarching goal. So not just a generic tip like saving into a pension, but telling them what actions to take and the specifics of what they could do, drive them to an action or a behaviour. They wanted to do the right thing regarding their money. They had good intentions. They needed tools and support. So we needed to empower them and not empower them to take positive actions and not just patronise them or chastise them for making mistakes. They also found oversimplified tips or tips that trivialise money matters and complex issues were a bit patronising, and again, they'd often reject those out of hand. The tip needed to be long enough to tell them what to do and give them useful information, but short enough that they could hold it in mind and be practical and not generic. University leavers wanted to think in greater depth than their slightly younger peers. They were thinking more of the long term and needed to kind of have a more sophisticated view of their money. At a more detailed level, this work also told us what areas young adults were really interested and wanted to know more about. The first thing on that list and the most important thing was use of credit, and that's why I'm really grateful to Dr. Lindsay Appleyard, who's in the room, and the work that she's recently published with Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust on young adults and their use of credit. Other topics that came up were making investment choices, pension savings and budgets, and I know others in the room will have taken on those areas and done work to kind of improve our knowledge and experience in those areas too. The final thing I want to talk about is having the right messenger. So using the right messenger to deliver your intervention is also really critical. Strong evidence is pointing towards using peers or near to peers as trusted messengers. A further literature review that was conducted for us by Edinburgh University in 2023 shows what works in terms of financial capability for young people and children. And that included peer-to-peer and near-to-peer learning, particularly in face-to-face environments and at transition points, including from school to work. It also allowed young people to learn from the experiences of older peers and could be particularly beneficial for vulnerable children and young adults. Another piece of strong evidence in this area comes from our Savings and Credit Pathfinder, which we published in March 2021, which focused on a youth checkpoint as a particularly important work stream. It embedded advice and guidance within journeys and existing support services at transition points. And it showed us that what was really important was the advice coming from a trusted voice. It improved the reach of money guidance, and it was working with trained practitioners to kind of balance that need for advice out with other support that they were also getting. It also showed us how important co-creation was and really involving young adults in the kind of development of that advice. And we mean genuine co-creation, so co-designing and targeting young adults and leading them to develop really jargon-free, accessible advice that resonated with young people and picked up their own cultural references and experiences in the work that we co-designed in terms of the intervention. So just then to go back over quickly the evidence, what we've got there is a group of young adults who have low financial well-being and a high need for debt advice. It's not a one-size-fits-all group. It's not behaviourally, it's not situationally, and it's not attitudinally either. They are behaving in different ways, and they are making real decisions with real money in real time. And anything we do to try to work with them to improve their financial well-being really does need to respect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And we move to Pauline next.
I'm Pauline Prevett. I'm from Manchester Institute of Education at the University of Manchester. And I'm going to talk about my research in the financial literacy of students. And then in the discussion, I will aim to make connections for implications for practice. So towards understanding the financial landscapes of students, first of all, I want to say I'm delighted to speak on behalf of the Finscapes team and also acknowledge Hayley and Sophia, and now moved on to bigger and better things. So we take an approach that sees financial literacy as a social practice. And my interest in financial literacy grew from leading an evaluation study of a financial literacy education programme that targeted pre-university sixth form students. And taking a mixed methods approach, we followed students over a course of 3 years. So based on interviews, we conducted an analysis of cultural models or storylines implied in the students' discourse about what it means for them to be financially capable. And they told us that this meant being able to have a social life, having some independence from parents, and being able to show they're responsible and can be trusted, and having confidence to make and take their own decisions. And for some, a credit card was seen as a rite of passage. And they began to develop ways of acting and being pertaining to financial matters in their lives. In other words, financial social identities, which they then used to show themselves as transitioning towards adulthood. And they did this in various ways. They tended to position themselves towards one of 3 models, although they may draw on all 3 in the course of their interviews. Debt adverseness, what we term consumer savvy or consumer aware, or being entrepreneurial. And these 3 cultural models influence their decision making and their actions. So some of the students were in the very early stages of developing a financial identity, and we term those becoming to signal the development of very nascent financial identities. So at that time, definitions of financial literacy were largely synonymous with financial knowledge. And this also applied to the available measures. So we are going back a few years now. So we needed to develop our own measures. And we chose to develop a measure of financial literacy self-efficacy. So self-efficacy implies a domain in which confidence is measured that is specific to the context of use. And so in this case, the context of the social practice of financial literacy for our target group of pre-university students, so 16 to 19-year-olds. So it's quite specific, and that's one of the things that we've found, that we need to really understand the context of use for the target group, rather than going across the age room as one. And we found the concept of financial literacy aligned well with the social practice perspective. On to that one. We concur that the understanding of the lived experience of young people of that domain is so important. And that's largely because of the socio-economic influences on personal financial management. So having asked questions of our participants that covered A, B, C, and D in the diagram, we were then able to extract financial social practice domain as mapped out here in the diagram. So our interviews were then able to inform the development of the measures. So this work led to the development of a financial literacy self-efficacy scale with subscales. We use rationalisis for the validation. And the subscales were classroom-situated financial literacy. And then what we termed performance in practice in a social way, such as engaging with bank staff or discussing financial matters, their own personal financial matters with friends and family. And performance in practice in an individual way, such as having online bank accounts. And these days, that would include financial apps, using financial apps. And the fourth subscale, we termed that engagement with the financial industry. And we also included questions within that around aspirations to work in the sector. Our aim was to provide a measure which included all the main domains in which our students practice financial literacy. So this was a clear direction on our part to move the understanding of financial literacy and measurement of financial literacy beyond the classroom and beyond those knowledge-based maths types of calculations that are sometimes used to define and confine research in financial literacy with young people. I'll move on now. So looking at gender differences across the scales and subscales, but with the caveats, this is a small sample, it's opportunistic, and it's samples intended for instrument validation, rather than being representative of inference to a wider population. And it was interesting, we had the expected result for the overall measure that the males were more confident on the main scale, and this was also the case for the classroom situated subscale, so that more traditional financial literacy knowledge, and for engagement in the financial sector, which wasn't surprising. What was perhaps surprising was we found no difference, and a slight reversal, but no difference for the subscales that were on performance in practice. So this suggested to us that when we consider the use of financial knowledge, i.e. the application in the real world, outside of the classroom, that female students are not necessarily disadvantaged or less confident than their male counterparts. So we now catapult ourselves forward several years. So my background's really more in maths education research and inclusive education, but I've been interested in financial education across now about 15, 20 years. So we then moved on to focus on what we've called financial landscapes. And we coined the term financial landscapes to stand for the focus on what does money or finances mean in your life. And it's a concept that's based on Anne-Marie Lloyd's definition of information landscapes, and that's the ability to know what there is in a landscape and to draw meaning from it through engagement and experience with that information. So in this case, through engagement with their personal financial practices. And rather than semi-structured interviews or standard interviews in the way we'd worked before, we found these concept mapping interviews very effective because they also gave the participants time to think and reflect and come to understand their own personal financial landscapes, their own practices and ways of thinking about finance and how it connects with their life, because I had enough time to think about that during the interview. So the interview is very simple in many ways. They drew a map and then we asked them to discuss it with us. So that was the concept map interview. And this is an example here of one of the younger university students' maps. And similarly, the three maps in the third row here, they're all from young university students. They're looking at input in, money out. There's usually some social implications there, travel, perhaps whether they can have a car or not, those types of matters. Okay, so where we compare then with an older student within our pilot study, so we just had 11 participants in this first pilot study. And you can see how much more complicated it is for the older, mature student there. So where we're at now is that we have conducted another, call it pilot study, but we've conducted concept map interviews with millennial students and also developed new measures that can be done with that older, used with that older age group. So just get to my point there. So for millennial students, delayed gratification and culturally rooted beliefs about family responsibility and financial support was very important. And financial responsibilities were complex and significant for the millennial group, owing to them having family needs, caring needs, and often needing to manage to provide for others while studying. On the other hand, our younger students, university students, Generation Z, they also share deeply rooted, culturally influenced beliefs about finances. And they focused often on doing their parents proud in some way, trying to stay in credit or at least to manage debt responsibly. And they wanted to show that they deserved some trust responsibly. So often very much in the emergent adult phase, where they're semi-independent, dependent often on their parents, still quite substantially economically, but socially independent in their social lives. And university was seen as the now, so they didn't have that sense of needing to provide, and it's very much about themselves and themselves in that moment, partly because of the way they're bounded by the course. So across the projects, we witnessed what we'd term a move from piggy banking to personal banking, influenced by moving out of the family home, at least in term time, with shifts from operating within the private zone, where mum might be looking after the money, making decisions, towards a public domain, and with greater focus on part-time working, primarily having social expenses and particularly managing food shopping and paying bills, including rent. So learning to cook can be really important in the budgeting terms for them. Given the complexities of personal financial landscapes and how they're mediated by socially, culturally influenced beliefs and practices, we consider when we're researching financial literacy or financial identities, then we need to look at the stage of the life cycle of that target group at points of significant life change. So in our case, that was moving out of the family home. So we now have a number of research tools available and need to decide on the next steps of what to do with them. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Thank you. And Carla, shall we move to your presentation next?
Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Carla. I'll do a proper introduction in a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit today about some research that my company Wealthbrite undertook in Q1 of this year, looking at the financial well-being of junior lawyers in the UK, and I'll explain a bit about the why and what we did and what we found. So what you'll hear a bit about Wealthbrite and what we do, our mission and kind of our purpose. I'll share a little bit more about how we shaped the project and the work that we did with Hayley and Andy and the team at Aston. I'll then go to talk a little bit more about sort of the quantitative and qualitative outputs that we found as a result of the work we undertook, and then finally think a little bit about where we might go next. So a bit about me, if you haven't already judged, the accent is Northern Irish. However, I have been living in London for the last 22 years, where I transitioned in my career from being a corporate lawyer to working in financial services across both the UK and the US. And throughout my time in those roles, I was involved in a number of initiatives around policy, the explanation of finances and taxes in particular for school-aged children, as well as those who were looking to enter the workforce. And I sort of decided to take the leap and try and make this an ongoing sustainable project through the organisation Wealthbrite, where we believe that actually everyone, regardless of starting point in life, shouldn't just be afforded the opportunity, but critically the knowledge, skills and confidence to live more and worry less. And for us, that means delivering practical strategies. So I think a couple of the people on the panel today have already touched on this idea, and I'm hugely in favour of an applied learning framework where actually we're teaching skills around money management and financial confidence in an environment where people are actually going to be able to put it into practice, and for us that's in the workplace. So why, I suppose, to answer the question you might have, why do money worries or financial well-being matter in the workplace? Well, some of you in the room may be very familiar with these statistics. I think it was the Centre for Economic and Business Research that looked at the impact to the British economy as a result of low financial literacy and found that UK employers were bearing an annual cost of £25 billion as a result of low financial literacy in the UK, and that was showing up as a result of absences and low productivity in the workforce. But a more recent study by PwC has actually found that those that are actively worried about money are 3 times more likely to be looking for a new job. And of those looking, 3/4 said they would be more attracted to an employer that cares about their financial well-being. And this is really critical in terms of the data points and evidence for us as an organisation, as we're working with employers to help them support their people to develop financial literacy skills. But of course, it's not always that straightforward, is it? And when we started out at Wealthbrite, so we work across professional services sectors, a lot with the legal industry, that's our primary market, but we work also with those in the banking and tech sectors. And it might not surprise you to know that when we started to sort of campaign on the issue around financial wellbeing in the workplace, we were met with a certain level of skepticism. Why? Well, because these statistics are nice, but they apply to everybody else and not my people. Or maybe put another way, my people earn so much money that surely they've got it all sorted out. There's, we don't have financial wellbeing issues here. So I think it was back end of 22, actually, we decided to create a project which would in some ways go to rebut the proposition that if I only pay my people more, that will resolve the financial wellbeing issues. And we worked closely with Hayley to craft a hypothesis that we felt could really have some impact when we went to speak to businesses about why this is just so important, not just to their individual employees, but also to them as organisations. So we framed the hypothesis as such: does having a higher income make you more financially confident and less prone to the effect of financial shocks? The methodology we adopted was a combination of what we classed as a discovery session, which is just a short survey, and we invited lawyers from across the UK at all grades of their experience to answer a series of questions that measured financial well-being against three key metrics, which I'm sure many of you here will recognise because they are borrowed from the MAPS financial well-being strategy, which is how are you managing day to day, what is your level of financial preparedness, and then what are your mindsets and attitudes when it comes to money. And we did quite a bit of work with Hayley to ensure that the design of those questions was both engaging and intuitive to answer, but would really remove as much bias as possible in the outputs. We then brought together a round table of 20 junior lawyers in this context for a more in-depth qualitative conversation to discuss key themes that came out of the survey response. I should say, for these purposes, when we're looking at young adults, we're looking in this context particularly at what we class junior lawyers means anybody in a trainee context through to 4 years of post-qualified experience, which in general terms will mean they range in age from about 23 to 25 through to 30, depending on when they left university and how quickly they moved into their jobs. So that's the sort of top end of the young adult spectrum, I suppose. So what did we find? Let's look at the quantitative outputs first. So this is a really important one for us and actually has been probably the most critical data point that we've been able to present to the industry, which is that money worries or financial stress is significantly high in the industry. And you'll note the U-shaped curve here. And this has actually been, I think, the thing that's probably shocked the industry the most. Because whilst many people might have expected younger people in their workforce to be worrying about money for all manner of reasons, they didn't necessarily expect that those at the latter stages of their career who are well through their experience base in the workplace and on significantly higher income than those at the start of their career are also almost equally as worried. So the statistics were 80% of trainees, those in the first 2 years of their career, were worrying about money almost on a daily basis, and 78% of 10 plus PQE lawyers worrying about it as well. Now, we didn't conject as to why that might be, but I'm sure many of you might have thoughts on that, and we can talk to that in the discussion if you'd like to. We also find that alongside that sort of level of financial stress and anxiety, that actually managing day to day was a bit of a struggle for many young lawyers. So around the concept of budgeting, most of the young lawyers told us they either simply didn't budget or didn't know how to. And so you'll see on the screen for many of these slides, I've got some qualitative quotes from the roundtable discussion to kind of support what we found in the data. We also found that 1 in 5 of all of the lawyers, so this crosses every grade of lawyers, were routinely using credit or borrowing money to pay for everyday essentials because they had run out of money. So this is not just using credit to max out the Amex points, this was using credit because we didn't have any other solution. And actually, when we dug into some of the detail, what we also found, you'll see it later quoted, was that almost half of all of the lawyers who responded to our survey told us that they felt pressure to spend beyond their means. We believe that is particular to the industry in which they're operating. We're doing a little bit more digging to verify that. But actually, of those people that said, I feel pressure to spend beyond my means, over 50% of them were relying on credit for everyday essentials, which I guess goes hand in hand, right? If you're feeling pressure to go beyond what you have. We also, alongside the sort of day-to-day management, looked, as I said, at financial preparedness. And unfortunately, what we saw was vulnerability in the system. So although the vast majority said they were saving regularly, actually 42% of those early career joiners said that they would struggle to pay for an unexpected cost of £850 without relying on credit or borrowing. Now again, this is an index that we've borrowed from the ONS Opinions and Lifestyle Survey. And what really shocked us about this statistic was that actually, in general, I think the last, when we did this research, the ONS data showed that on average, 42% of people would struggle to pay that £850 unexpected expense. But if you look at the image I have on screen, you'll see that they've started to sort of disaggregate that data based on income levels. And when we looked more closely at what was going on at an income level per the ONS data, which is the bars on the far right hand, you'll see that as income ratchets up, the percentage of people that say they wouldn't be able to afford that expense drops significantly. And yet, within the legal trainee population, who on average, depending on where you are based in the UK, rates of income will range from £25,000 through to up to £65,000, are underperforming against their national peers on this metric. So we were concerned about this, and we'd like to know more about what's going on there. We also asked the question, do you invest? This is a standard question that we ask in all of our surveys and our polls that we do, and all of our events that we host, we ask this question. And time again, we hear the answer, no or don't know. What does this tell us? Well, probably two things. One, for those that profess to saving regularly, that perhaps there is a bias towards cash savings, and therefore perhaps an exposure to inflation on those savings. But more importantly, particularly in a workplace context, there remains a significant lack of understanding of a workplace pension as a form of investment. So that's a key thing, a key message that we play back to employers time and time again. Moving on now to the qualitative outputs. I mentioned we brought people together, so there was 20 junior lawyers brought together to discuss two questions. One, what was driving their levels of stress? And two, what practically might help to improve their financial confidence? So in general terms, what was driving a lot of the stress we found to be really what you might describe as socioeconomic influences. Quite a lot of the lawyers professed to this feeling of pressure coming from the should effect. That I should have already achieved certain financial milestones at this stage in my life or at this level of earnings. That I should be better with my money or somehow I should know more than I do. And that pressure they recognised is arbitrary, logically, but they felt it to be particularly emotionally draining. And as one person actually points out, and you'll see in the quotes there, actually made their whole experience of managing money really unenjoyable. and actually was causing them to then sort of step away from kind of trying to engage, because actually it all was becoming a bit too overwhelming and as I said, not enjoyable. The other aspect of kind of socioeconomic influences that was driving some level of anxiety relates to the generational divide. So particularly within the legal industry, we heard a lot of feedback around what I describe as the relatability gap between those in senior leadership and those at the beginning of their career. Law is known as being an extremely high income environment, much more so than many of the other professions. For those that don't know, there's been an influx of US law firms into the UK, which has pushed wages up enormously. It's now not uncommon for newly qualified solicitors, that's those that have passed their 2 years of training, so are in their 3rd year of experience, to be earning above £100,000. That's pretty standard in the City of London now. And so actually there is this real disparity between how senior members of the organisation will have experienced their career and their fortunes as a junior lawyer and the experiences of their current junior staff. And what we have observed, both anecdotally and in terms of some of the data points that were coming out, was that actually, senior leaders don't really fully appreciate the world in which their junior colleagues are operating. So whilst, yes, of course, they are aware of the cost of living crisis, they're less aware of the impact of things like record levels of student debt that are impacting on how far take-home pay goes. So statistically, UK law graduates leave university with £43,000 of debt. But you are required to go through formal legal exams after leaving university, and not everybody is able to do that without self-funding. So myself is a good example of that. I self-funded my legal practice course, which meant by the time I reached the workplace, I had about £65,000 of student debt or some other form of personal debt as a result of my formal education. And that is not uncommon today. Which means, of course, your take-home pay doesn't go as far as people might think looking at the headline figure. Of course, it goes without saying that record levels of rent are not helping this, and the cost of living, of course, putting even more pressure on how far their take-home pay can go. So moving then on to, well, what might improve financial confidence? We didn't want to just talk in sort of terms that would focus solely on the negative. We wanted to be able to present solutions back to the industry that also were driven from the people that were going to be benefiting most from whatever might be suggested. So when we asked what might improve financial confidence, there's four things I will speak to, but 2 things I want to highlight here. Let's first look at the graph on the right-hand side. We asked people, who do you trust most for financial advice or support? And I think this chart is rather telling because, of course, the workplace is ranked so low as to be negligible. Perhaps not surprising because, of course, money is already a societal taboo, and therefore speaking up in the workplace on matters that you might be struggling with may even feel like a stretch too far for many. However, notwithstanding that, there was a lot of really practical suggestions that came out of our group around how the workplace might be able to better support them to develop more positive financial well-being. The first one is super important to me, and that's the creation of role models. So one of the things that both the people in our discussion group talked to, but we also at Wealthbrite talk a lot about, is how financial well-being, the world of financial well-being, can learn from what has been done well around mental health. And the creation of positive role models in the workplace as a way to speak more openly, break societal taboos, and actually change the culture in which we operate is seen as significant. And junior lawyers said that they really wanted to hear more from people who were more senior to them. In fact, some of the quotes said, seeing how people more senior to me have managed would help relieve some of my financial anxiety. And I feel like it would be more helpful for me to see how someone who's in the same industry and who has similar lifestyle demands as me has handled things. And of course, coming off the back of that kind of creation of role models and raising awareness internally in organizations is the opportunity to create a safe space for conversation. And this is, again, when we talk about organizational psychology and how we can bring financial well-being into that conversation, we talk a lot to the industry about thinking not just about diversity in their workforce, and law has done great things to broaden the diversity of candidates that step through their doors, but now we need to think more positively about the inclusion metric. And how can we create positive conversation spaces around money as a way to encourage or allow people to feel like they belong in that environment? That's particularly important for people that come from a lower socioeconomic background who frequently tell us that they feel othered in a high-income environment and don't necessarily know what to do with their newfound levels of earnings. Finally, skills training, and I'm conscious of time, sorry. Specific skills were mentioned, how to develop a more positive relationship with money, budgeting and setting realistic goals, getting started with investing, and saving versus debt management. Those are the 4 areas that junior lawyers wanted to be guided on more practically and felt that the workplace was an appropriate environment in which to receive that learning. So, key learnings and quick recap. Coming back to the hypothesis that we posed, I guess our conclusions, well, where levels of financial stress are used as a barometer alongside sort of managing day to day for financial confidence, then our findings suggest that there's no link between income and financial confidence in the legal industry. Looking at the data on managing money day to day and investment behaviour, then again, as a measure for an individual's ability to withstand financial shock, we saw what we believe to be significant vulnerability in the system. And then I saw more generally from our perspective at Wealthbrite, we see the transition into the workforce as a key life stage, where actually a lot of financial literacy theory is put into practice often for the first time. And that there's clear demand for more support around young adults in the workforce from their employers. Finally, where to next? And I guess just to let you guys know what we're up to. We do plan to rerun the survey in 24 to broaden the population size. I should have said at the beginning, we had approximately 120 respondents to the survey, and as I mentioned, 20 brought together in the roundtable discussion. So this was a pilot to kind of explore this topic. This year we will look to do a much more in-depth analysis of the industry, and we're aiming to work with the law societies across the country to help facilitate that. We will be including new metrics around looking at new routes into the workplace, particularly the new apprenticeship route into law, which will allow us to capture those from age 18 upward. We will look to be able to disaggregate the data on a more geographical lens to look at disparities on a regional basis around financial wellbeing. And lastly, we would like to start to consider the link between financial literacy and social mobility. I'm going to say this, and even though it's recorded, hey, who cares? Social mobility is a bit of a hot topic in the world of workplace kind of diversity and inclusion and well-being. It's getting a lot of attention, and we'd like to be able to position some of what we do around supporting financial literacy as part of what organisations do to support the progression of people from wider and more diverse socioeconomic backgrounds in the workplace. So that's kind of the thinking behind that. So that's me done. Please feel free to grab me for a chat during the downtime after our session. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn. If you've got a device, you can scan the code now or come and find me and I'll show you it later. And otherwise, read more about what we do on our website, which is wealthbrite.co.uk. Great, thank you so much.
The whole new slide, there we go. Great, thank you very much, Carla. Thank you to all our panellists for the presentations. I thought that was really interesting, really insightful. Some really kind of key crossovers coming from all of the presentations, I thought, around the kind of complexity of challenges faced by young adults, maybe not knowing exactly where to turn to get the sort of advice they need. The diversity of experiences, which isn't just about the kind of hard knowledge or even the hard income, right? The hard bucks that they've got. So more thinking about the challenges around confidence, self-efficacy. And also I really like this thread around, like, you know, less normativity that's needed, less should messages and more kind of empowerment and more kind of like, yeah, engaging with people peer to peer. I thought they were really interesting threads from all the presentations. We will be coming to audience questions, so put your thinking caps on. And shortly I'll ask you to raise your hand if you're interested in asking a question, but I'm going to use chair's privilege just to start with one. I wondered if any of our panellists might want to say more about what do you think are the real key factors shaping young adults' experiences of finance in the UK today? What would you kind of summarise that as? Anyone want to?
Yeah, I can go with this one. I think family beliefs and family practices are perhaps still the key. That's really important because the family, if we talk about family influences, we're really picking up on these local social cultural influences. So looking at different diverse groups as well. But also there are peer influences, of course. But as students get older, the peer influences get less. Yeah, so family influence is really important. So more at the earlier adolescence, there'd be more peer influences. But then other factors being, well, cost of living, exorbitant rents, student loans in the case of students, yeah, and just trying to sort of move on as an adult. Yeah.
I think I was thinking about this question yesterday when I was sat at my desk. And actually, fortuitously, an email popped into my inbox. That happens quite often. But this one was really fortuitous. It was from the nursery, a research agency. And I read it and I thought, gosh, that's the answer to Hayley's question. Young adults who are turning 18 today in this year have had 7 prime ministers. They faced a financial cost of living crisis. Their tuition fees have tripled. They've seen things like legislation of same-sex marriage. They've seen Brexit. And of course, they've seen the pandemic. And that's the world they're in. And that's what's shaping their financial experiences. All of those things which aren't in their control are really directly impacting them, their lives, the decisions they're making and their finances. And that's a really tough environment. You know, they've seen 2 monarchs as well. That's the most any of us have ever seen. So they're in a really changing environment. There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change going on. And that's impacting them, the world of work. And, you know, that's not even touching on things like AI and all of those concerns that are thrown in there, and how hard all of that must be for someone whose brain is still developing to be dealing with that and thinking about how they're going to face paying their rent, you know, getting a job, all of those things. I think that's just a really hard context to be in. So I thought, oh, thank you, nursery. That's pretty much answered Hayley's question. Brilliant.
Absolutely. When you reflect on what that means for people's own confidence, right?
Yeah.
That we're beginning to realise is really important when it comes to making financial decisions.
Yeah.
Carla, did you
Yeah, I was going to concur on the idea that lived experience is so important in terms of a young person's level of financial confidence. I think there is also this dynamic, which I think, Helen, you mentioned in your conversation at the start, which was this influx of or overload of information or possible opportunities in which to engage with the financial system. So I think the rise of fintech has been enormously welcome in terms of lowering the sort of barriers of access to engaging with the financial system. But my observation is that many young people feel terribly overwhelmed by the amount of choice they have, or the sheer number of channels through which to consume that information, and so are looking for places which can convert that information into something that's digestible and practicable, I should say, so something they can actually apply to their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you all very much. I'll come to the audience. Do I have any questions amongst the audience? I see a hand immediately from Debbie. Oh, we've got Lynn with roving mics as well.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Hayley. I'm Debbie Price from the University of Manchester. So, hi, Pauline. Thanks for 3 really stimulating conversations. My question is to Carla. Thanks for absolutely fascinating account. It's a geek question, but just wondered if you could say something about possible bias in your sample. Maybe because those levels of anxiety about money are really concerning in a very wealthy young population on average. But I just wondered if the more anxious were more likely to respond. I don't know how you found them. The other thing I was wondering is the role of parents, because most lawyers, not all, but most lawyers will have very middle-class parents and who often help them with housing costs particularly, buy houses for them or provide deposits for them or so on. And I wondered if you were able to differentiate those people at all, but maybe your sample was a bit small to do that.
No, great questions. So I think the first question was around bias that might have existed in the population. So the way we kind of gathered responses was through a combination of using social media as a way to kind of spread the message. So that was through LinkedIn and also an Instagram audience of 14,500. We teamed up with lawfluencers, which is a thing, to spread the message to our target audience. We did also share the survey through existing client channels that we had. So law firms that we already had a relationship with, who we wanted to ensure that their people had an opportunity to take part. So I think, to be honest, the bias that I would guess most towards, and I think probably does exist in our data today, is that we're probably quite London-centric in the responses. I can't verify that for sure because we didn't ask people in last year's study to say where they were answering from or where they were based. That is something we will be picking up this year. I suppose I would. I'm not sure whether or not I wholly agree with the idea that the levels of family support are as high as maybe you think. I think my observation in the folk that sat in our roundtables were that actually there was quite a broad range of people at the table. I mean, law's actually just been called out as the top industry with the Social Mobility Employers Index. So they ranked first out of all industries in terms of the representation of lower socioeconomic candidates going through their doors. So actually, as an industry at the lower end of their employee workforce, they are very well represented across the sort of social spectrum. To be honest, I don't have the answer to your question, but I think, again, that's part of why we want to rerun the survey and go a bit deeper into some of these dynamics that could be showing up in the results. But I agree with you, the levels of anxiety and stress are enormous. I would say that law, there is a mental health charity that we partner with in law called Law Care. Their statistics on general stress and anxiety in the system in law also kind of would suggest similar rates of stress particularly amongst junior lawyers. So it's a high stress environment, and that may be contributing to perceived levels of stress around money as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Carla. I had a question from the gentleman in front here.
Hello, Gareth Morgan from Ferret Information Systems. Two questions for the first and the third speaker, I guess. On the first one, interesting to see that you had in one of your charts 45% of people with, what was the phrase, struggling, and 63% of people, 45% low well-being and 63% struggling. That's quite a big difference, what sounds pretty similar. And then for the last speaker, agreeing with the points about the kind of equalisation of the cohort and so forth, are there some interesting bits to look at the fact that perhaps there is not just the expensive living area for a lot of junior lawyers, but also there are social pressures and professional pressures on networking, which in itself is expensive. And I have to say as a comment that the concept of somebody having financial problems being able to afford to go to an IFA looking for advice really strikes me as quite a contrast.
Shall I take, so that 45%, I think that's remember it right, with low financial wellbeing looks more broadly than just someone's ability to pay their bills and commitments. So low financial wellbeing, we've taken a measure. It uses 9 key questions to assess someone's financial wellbeing. It goes across how much, whether they're saving, whether they're confident managing their money, whether they are thinking about their future and planning for retirement. So it takes into account a kind of broader spectrum to get that number for low financial wellbeing. So that's why it doesn't quite correlate with that struggling to keep up with bills and credit. So it's looking more broadly, that low financial wellbeing number. And we do see that go up, in general with older people. They have better financial wellbeing. They're more likely to have high financial wellbeing. So that's why there's that difference and discrepancy. I think that 63% struggling to keep up with their bills and commitments chimes more with that 39% who need the debt advice, who are definitely in need. And if you add on to that the 30-odd% that are on the cusp of needing debt advice, those numbers make more sense, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just say I think you're absolutely right that the industry of law presents itself actively as a sort of quite a luxurious environment in which to work. That is particularly often true in London. I actually was remarking to someone recently about a lot of the social media posts that go out from law firms at this time of year, calling for applications for junior lawyer roles, and all of them feature some, glitzy or glamorous location in London. And it is a problem, and I think it's a problem that it is genuinely compounded by TV programs. So when we talked to some of the junior lawyers, and this was discussed, like how actually a lot of young people go into some of these professions with an idealized vision of what life will be like, and that might have been in my day Ally McBeal, and in their day Suits, and of course you're right that there is social pressure in certain industries to be seen in certain locations, to be wearing certain clothes and looking in a particular way. And of course, that all comes at great cost often. I think your second question or second point was around a kind of the connection with or the ability to engage with financial advice. I will say that in our conversations with the legal industry, what I have observed is a huge amount of skepticism from those in higher grades of their career towards the advisory market. Language like they're just after a piece of my pie, or this perception that actually they're perhaps not genuinely getting advice that is right for them. So lawyers would often get phone calls from private banks on a regular basis, cold calls saying, you should come and do work with us, we can help you, blah, blah, blah. Actually, as a result, I think that there is a general reticence to engage with some of the opportunities that are already afforded to them. So many law firms, and this is true across a lot of professional services, actively provide access to things like a mortgage advisor or financial advisor if you would like to take them up. Those are chronically underused, I would say, across a lot of professional services. So part of what I think we're trying to do is say, let's help people grow their levels of financial awareness and confidence around engaging with the system so that they can kind of graduate from feelings of not knowing and perhaps the shame of not knowing, because of course they're highly qualified lawyers who are paid to be experts in the room and therefore feel a great deal of shame admitting that they don't know something. And let's help them move from that to feeling a little bit more like actually there's something good for me out of engaging with the financial system more proactively.
I think it's really interesting, Pauline's kind of discussion around self-efficacy in that. It's not kind of confidence, is it something else other than confidence we're getting at here? It's not just about the level of money you have, it kind of overlaps. So I think that's really interesting. I'm going to come to a question from an online attendee. We've got a question from Cameron Waldron. Cameron, would you like to ask your question?
Probably quite timely that I'm coming on, because actually I am a financial advisor. I am also a researcher. I recently completed a dissertation on financial wellbeing at Brunel, and I also deliver financial wellbeing workshops in the workplace. So I concur with what you said, Carla. I can tell you I've done. Whenever we run a workshop, we do pre-workshop questionnaires using financial literacy and financial self-efficacy measures, so that we can really hone in on what is really needed, and we don't actually talk about products at all in that training. And I can agree with you. We're operating mainly in the Midlands and London, and we did some work with some barristers and solicitors, and our results are fairly consistent with what yours are. So regionally, they don't seem to be much different, but they also don't seem to be much different across different professions, because we work with a whole range of professions. But the one thing is, sometimes the measures bring up different results, and I found that in my dissertation, particularly looking at financial self-efficacy. Depending on what particular questionnaire you use, you get different results, and that's unfortunate. That's a problem within the research. And also in terms of financial well-being versus subjective financial well-being. Interestingly, we talked about that. Someone asked a question about struggling and well-being being similar. Well, we found in the research I did that certainly wasn't the case. Found a social housing estate in Northern Ireland, for example, where people there are struggling, but because of the community and the resources on hand, because of that community, they do have good financial well-being, because they have to. And there's one of the interesting results thrown up in the research I did, was the fact that actually anxiety, particularly in individuals later in life, can actually be used in a really positive way in terms of making some good financial decisions. And in terms of the financial advisors, I agree with what you're saying, but I don't think the issue is so much with people not going to financial advisors when they need to. It's not knowing when to, and that's one of the things we do in the workshops, is helping people identify when they do need some professional advice, not when the advisors want to deal with them, but when they need to deal with the advisor at a point where it can add some proper value. And I don't blame the research or anything for that. I blame the financial services industry squarely for that. And Carla, I think the work you're doing, I'd be really interested in talking to you and finding out more about what you're doing, because I think a lot of it correlates with us. But where does everybody see these issues in terms of the questionnaires we're using and why they're throwing up different results?
Anyone want to start with that?
Well, I think they're measuring different things, basically. There can be many measures of financial self-efficacy, just to take that. It's not the same as financial confidence measure. And often, a lot of these financial efficacy or confidence measures just have a few questions, and they're fairly general, which we've tended to try to avoid and sort of go against that. But the issue then is it means different things in different groups, and whether it really is comparable, whether the groups really are comparable. I think one of the most interesting thing as a methodologist is how complicated actually getting good data and knowing what the data means. And so when you've got your group of questions, what does that construct mean? Does it make a construct? Is it many constructs? What do you name it? And that part's quite subjective, very subjective. I think maybe a general answer, and someone else might want to be more specific. But
I think that's kind of it, isn't it? There's lots of different measures out there. They're measuring slightly different things, all of which are broadly related. And I think, the measure I talked about there when we talked about low financial wellbeing is something that our statistician at the Money and Pension Service has developed for us that looks at financial wellbeing. It's those key 9 questions that I mentioned. I'm not going to list them off the top of my head because I'll always forget one or get them wrong, but they are a construct that we've built using the 180 odd questions from our financial wellbeing survey. We've done data reduction, we've done principal components analysis, lots of very clever things that I can't explain properly, but to get to those 9 questions, to be fairly confident that that's measuring something that really fits well with our narrative definition of financial wellbeing and makes sense, it's got a good Cronbach's alpha. That's what Russell would want me to tell you. It's got a good Cronbach's alpha. It's measuring that construct of financial well-being well. Yeah, so we're using that at the moment because it doesn't just look at things like income. It looks at other things like confidence, and the work that Andy and team and others have done for us use that construct as a lens to look at financial well-being. And that's one way of looking at it. And I'm not saying anybody else's is not good or not measuring a similar construct. They're all measuring very similar things, and it's just about the nuance, I think.
Yeah, we are definitely talking about nuance of experiences in this area now, isn't it? That's a good thing. We're diving into people's experience in more depth. So I'm afraid we're at time. I know there were lots of other questions that people wanted to ask. I hope you all have plenty of time to ask them in the break and subsequent sessions as well. So we'll move to a break. Thank you again to all of our wonderful panellists.